Hello, good morning all. I welcome you all in B.Sc.III Microbiology class and I congratulate you for selecting microbiology as the major subject for your graduation. Dear students, this year your syllabus has been changed as per the CBCS pattern. Although the syllabus is changed, the pattern of papers, number of papers, practical courses and the marks allotted remain the same. So first all of you, I request you to go to the university website and download and go through the syllabus which is revised from this year onwards. This year you have two semesters, semester 5 and semester 6. There are 4 theory papers per semester. For semester 5, theory paper number 9, 10, 11 and 12. For semester 6, paper number 13, 14, 15 and 16. Each theory paper carries 50 marks in 40 plus 10 pattern. 40 marks examination will be conducted by the university and 10 marks are allotted to internal evaluation, continuous internal evaluation, which will be given by the college. I will be dealing with paper 11, Food and Industrial Microbiology. So let us directly start with our syllabus. Food and Industrial Microbiology. The first unit is majorly food microbiology and a small part of that syllabus covers about industrial microbiology. So we'll first start with the food microbiology. The first topic in the food microbiology is food as a substrate for the microorganisms. Now, what is food microbiology? Food microbiology is a branch of microbiology. This is an applied branch of microbiology. What we study in the food microbiology is we study the microorganisms associated with the food. We study the interactions of microorganisms with the food and we study how to preserve the food. What are the various methods for food preservation? So food microbiology is a branch of microbiology that deals with microorganisms associated with the food, their interactions with the food and the method of food preservation, various methods of food preservation. So our food, if we think, mainly constitutes two things, plant origin and animal origin. Plant and plant parts and animal or indirect products from the animals. Here the pictures show the vegetarian food, the food derived from plants or plant parts and the food that is derived directly or indirectly from the animals. Direct products from animals will include meat, beef, fish, etc. While indirect products will include eggs, milk, etc. Plant and plant product foods, of course, will include vegetables, fruits, cereal grains, etc. Now, how the microorganisms interact with the food? As microorganisms are ubiquitous in nature, they are present everywhere. You can see microorganisms in the bottom of the oceans. You can see them on the top of the hills. You can see them in the Antarctica, even in the space. So there is no place in the world where microorganisms are absent. Naturally, microorganisms will be found on and in the food also. So whenever the microorganisms are present, they will interact with the surroundings. So when the microorganisms are present in the food, they will interact with the food. The interactions of microorganisms in the food, we can broadly divide into two types. Sometimes this interaction is beneficial for us, beneficial for human beings. Sometimes these interactions are beneficial and sometimes these interactions are harmful. So what are the different types of beneficial interactions of microorganisms with the food? The beneficial interactions include food fermentations mainly and probiotics. Food fermentations means the fermentations carried out to get more delicious or palatable food products. The example is curd, breads, idli, dhokla, these things. And the probiotics are used to improve the gut health. The examples of probiotics are yogurt, sauerkraut, kombucha, tempeh, kimchi, pickles, kefir and muesli. So beneficial interactions of the microorganisms with the food are used for making the foods more delicious, or they are used to improve the health and physiology. Many times the interactions of the food and the microorganisms are harmful. What are the examples of harmful interactions? The microorganisms interact with the food and spoil the food, or the microorganisms interact with the food, they cause food infections, or they cause food poisoning. The food spoilage by microorganisms may be due to off flavors produced by microbial growth, or enzymatic changes that are produced in the food because of growth of microorganisms, or the microbial enzymes cause oxidation reactions in the food and make the food undesirable. This is called as food spoilage. The picture is showing spoiled bread and the spoiled tomatoes, that is food spoilage. Now, when we are discussing food as a substrate for microorganisms, it means that food is acting as nutrient source for the microorganisms. Whatever is food for us, that is food for microorganisms also. Therefore, whatever is food for us will be acted upon by microorganisms because they will also derive nutrients from our food. Microbial growth in the foods depends on many factors. These different factors are categorized into 4 types as intrinsic factors, extrinsic factors, implicit factors, and process factors. The 2 major types of factors include extrinsic factors and intrinsic factors. Now the picture is showing microorganisms in the food, different types of microorganisms in the food. All types of microorganisms are associated with the food. For example, there are bacteria, some of them are pathogens, some of them cause spoilage, some of the bacteria are used as probiotics. Fungi are associated with the food, which include yeast as well as molds. Some of the fungi are used for manufacturing the processed foods or fermented foods. Viruses are also associated with the foods, and there are some parasites associated with the foods. So whenever the microorganisms are interacting with the food, different characteristics of the food and the surrounding affect the growth of microorganisms. These factors, as I told you, are divided into 2 major groups as intrinsic factors and extrinsic factors. The intrinsic factors are the factors that are inherent to the food. Means actually these factors constitute the physical and chemical properties of the food. These include pH of the food, moisture content of the food, OR potential of the food, nutrient content of the food, antimicrobial constituents, means antimicrobial compounds that are associated with the food, and the biological structure of the food. Now there are some factors that are not associated with the food themselves, but these are associated with the environmental conditions where the food is stored. Such factors are called as extrinsic factors. The extrinsic factors include environmental conditions where the food is stored. Now, what are such different environmental conditions? The temperature of storage, the relative humidity of the environment where the food is stored, presence and concentration of different gases, presence and activity of other microorganisms in the food. These are the extrinsic factors. There are some factors which are called as implicit factors. These are the physiological properties of microorganisms that also determine food as a substrate for microorganisms. For example, hydrolytic activity of microorganisms. Some factors are called as process factors. These are the factors that will determine spoilage. For example, the vulnerability and type of microorganisms in the food, and based on this, how to select the preservation method. Now we will discuss some intrinsic factors one by one. The most important intrinsic factors which determine food as a substrate for microorganisms is pH. pH is the negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration, or we call it as the logarithm of reciprocal of hydrogen ion concentration. The picture is showing pH scale. The scale is from 1 to 14. From 1 to 7, the pH is called as acidic pH. From 7 to 14, it is called as basic or alkaline pH, and exactly 7 is called as neutral pH. Different foods have different pH depending upon their composition. Now, microorganisms, when grow in the food, they will grow if the pH of the food is favorable for them. So which type of pH is there in the food will determine what will grow in it and what will not grow in it. Different organisms have different cardinal pH values. Every organism has a pH range which is defined by minimum pH and maximum pH. Minimum pH is the pH below which there is no growth. Maximum pH is the pH above which there is no growth. And optimum pH is the pH at which there is maximum growth of the organism. Every organism has these three values of pH: minimum pH, maximum pH, and optimum pH. If the pH is below minimum, that particular organism will not grow. If the pH is above maximum, the organism will not grow. And if the pH is optimum, the organism will grow at maximum rate. There are different physiological groups of organisms depending upon their pH requirement and pH favorability. For example, acidophiles. Philes or philic indicates loving. Acidophiles means acid-loving organisms. For example, fungi, yeasts and molds. These are acidophilic in nature. These are acid-loving organisms. Means these organisms favor acidic pH for their growth. Second group, basophiles, also called as alkaliphilic organisms. These are alkali-loving organisms. That means they will show maximum growth if the pH is alkaline. And the third category is neutrophiles. These are the organisms which love neutral pH for their growth. They favor neutral pH for their growth. Basophiles, the example is Vibrio cholerae. The favorable pH is 9. Neutrophiles, most of the bacteria are neutrophilic in nature. The example here given is Salmonella, which favors neutral pH for its growth. Various foods have acidic pH. For example, fruits, soft drinks, fermented milks, pickles, sauerkraut. These are the examples of foods with acidic pH. Now, this acidity in the food is of two different types. Some foods have inherent acidity. For example, fruits, they have inherent acidity because of their composition. While in some foods, the acidity is developed due to action of some microorganisms. For example, curd, fermented milk. So when milk is there, it is neutral. But when it is fermented, it becomes acidic. So fermented milk has developed acidity. Sauerkraut, which we can call as pickle from cabbage, that is also an acidic food with developed acidity. Depending on the acidity, acidic foods are divided into 4 categories. Some foods are called as low acid foods. They have the pH more than 5.3. For example, milk, fish, and meat. Some foods are called as medium acid foods. They have the pH ranging from 5.3 to 4.5. For example, spinach, pumpkin. Some foods are called as high acid foods. They have the pH 4.5 to 3.7. For example, tomato, pineapple. And some foods are called as very high acid foods. They have very low pH, pH less than 3.7. For example, berries. More the acidic pH, more is the keeping quality of that particular food. Acidic foods are not readily spoiled by bacteria because most of the bacteria favor neutral pH for their growth and they are not able to grow at acidic pH. So they are not readily spoiled by bacteria. Acidic foods have excellent keeping quality and they are microbiologically more stable. They are prone to spoilage by yeasts and molds because yeasts and molds are acidophilic in nature. They favor acidic pH, so they can easily grow in acidic foods. And among yeasts and molds, again, molds can grow at acidities that are too great for yeasts and bacteria. Means molds can grow at very low pH values. And they also have a wider range of pH for their growth. Film yeasts grow in pickles and sauerkraut, of which the pH is 3.5 to 4.5, while fermentative yeasts grow in fruit juices, for example, pH 4 to 4.5. Most bacteria are neutrophilic in nature and therefore they favor foods with the neutral pH. For example, bacterial spoilage occurs in milk because its pH is near neutrality. There are some foods that have alkaline pH, for example, egg white. Which type of organisms will grow in this? Actively proteolytic bacteria grow in the foods with alkaline pH. Now, as we are talking about the pH, we should know that there are buffers in the food also. What buffers do? Buffers resist the change in pH. So, the food has its inherent pH, but also buffering capacity. Some foods have high buffering capacity, while some foods have low buffering capacity. Whatever food is rich in proteins, it will have high buffering capacity because proteins can act as buffers. For example, meat and milk are highly buffered because they are rich in proteins. Vegetables are poorly buffered. Milk allows accumulation of acid to produce fermented milk products. Buffers in the food are effective within a certain pH range. And beyond that pH range, they are not very effective. And because of this, they permit the fermentations to go on a longer duration and they produce acidic or alkaline products. Low buffering power helps in succession of organisms during fermentation. For example, when we are making pickles, initially lactic acid bacteria grow in the pickles and they produce lactic acid. Because of lactic acid production, the pH becomes acidic. And because of this acidic pH of the pickles, pectin hydrolyzing bacteria or proteolytic bacteria are not allowed to grow. Their growth is prevented. So this is called as succession of organisms. Lactic acid is produced during early pickle fermentation and this prevents the growth of undesirable pectin hydrolyzing and proteolytic bacteria. The initial pH of the food may be altered by growth of microorganisms and makes the pH suitable for other organisms. For example, milk is fermented, curd is made. When curd is made, the pH becomes acidic. And in the curd, then different types of microorganisms will grow that will favor acidic pH for their growth. The type of acid produced is also very important. It is found that organic acids are more inhibitory than other types of acids. pH can be measured with pH meter. Now, pH is thus a profoundly affecting factor for composition of food and for growth of microorganisms. Thus, pH determines which type of organisms will grow in particular food and their rate of survival during storage, heating, drying, and other processing. Now, the next intrinsic factor is moisture content of the food. Moisture content of the food is measured in terms of water activity, or we can call it as available water. Available water is designated as AW. What is this AW? It is the ratio of vapor pressure of solution to the vapor pressure of solvent. Ratio of vapor pressure of solution to the vapor pressure of solvent. AW of pure water is 1. When we add salt, the AW decreases. When we add sugar, the AW decreases. When we add certain gelling components in the water, the AW decreases. For example, available water, AW is available water. Available water in 22% sodium chloride solution, NaCl solution, is 0.86. And AW of saturated solution of NaCl is 0.75. Water is made unavailable by different things. When we add salts or sugars in the water, they bind water and they make the water unavailable. When the water is added with some gelling components or colloidal components, gel is formed and the water is made unavailable. When water is freezed to make ice, the water becomes unavailable. As for pH, so is true for AW also. Every organism has a minimal, a maximal, and an optimal AW for growth. Generally, bacteria require more water activity for their growth than the yeasts, and yeast requires more water activity than the molds. That means molds can grow in less available water, and bacteria require more available water for their growth. If AW is below optimum, means if the water is available below the optimum requirement, what will happen? It will lengthen the lag phase, means the growth will be slowed down. The growth rate will naturally decrease. And when the growth rate decreases, there will be decrease in the rate of synthesis of cell material. Different factors affect the AW requirement of organisms. Available water of organisms, their requirement is affected by various factors. These factors include type of solute, nutritive value of the food, oxygen supply in the food, pH of the food, temperature of storage of the food, and presence of microbial inhibitors in the food. Regarding type of solute, potassium chloride is less toxic than sodium chloride. This will be the example how type of solute will affect the AW. Nutritive value, more is the nutritionally rich food, the organisms can tolerate lower AW. If the food is nutritionally poor, they will require more moisture for their growth. Oxygen supply, if the organism is aerobic and there is availability of ample amount of oxygen for their growth, the organisms can tolerate lower AW for their growth. pH, if the pH is near neutrality, the organisms can tolerate lower AW for their growth. Extreme pH like acidity or alkalinity will affect the AW requirement of organisms. They will require more water for their growth, more moisture for their growth. Temperature of storage also affects. If the temperature is optimum, then the organisms can tolerate lower AW. Presence of inhibitors. Inhibitors inhibit the growth of organisms. They have toxic effect for the growth of organisms. Therefore, if inhibitors are present, then the organisms require more water activity, more moisture for their growth. And if the inhibitors are not there, they can tolerate lower water activity and they can grow. The table here indicates the AW requirement of some spoilage organisms. You can see there are different groups of organisms and the minimum AW required for those organisms for their growth in the food. Bacteria require more moisture. Minimal AW for bacterial growth is 0.91. Yeasts can grow at an AW value of 0.88. Molds can grow at an AW of 0.80. Halophilic bacteria, AW requirement minimal is 0.75. Xerophilic fungi, AW requirement is 0.65. And osmophilic yeasts, AW requirement is very less, 0.60. Now, what is halophilic? Halophilic organisms are salt-loving organisms. So when they are tolerating salt concentration, that means they can grow at lower water activity because salt is binding the water and they are growing in high salt concentration. Xerophilic organisms are growing in dried conditions. So naturally they will also be able to grow at lower AW. And osmophilic organisms means the organisms that love high osmotic pressure for their growth. And when osmotic pressure is high, that means water activity is less, available water is less. They can tolerate and grow at lesser AW. Thank you very much. The remaining factors we will see in the next video. Thank you.